Michael James had been fixing things his entire life, but the thing in front of him wasn't just broken. It was an insult to engineering itself. The small, sleek alien ship was riddled with errors. The self-repair systems had failed spectacularly, likely due to some overcomplicated safety protocols. The engine array was overheating, and the coolant lines were misaligned. Nothing catastrophic, but to the right set of hands, it might as well have been a death sentence. And yet, the kid standing beside, it looked more annoyed than afraid. Michael squinted at the alien child, a wiry, blue-skinned thing no taller than his chest, dressed in an intricate uniform that had definitely cost more than Michael had made in the past 6 months. The kid crossed his arms, his silver eyes scanning Michael with something dangerously close to disappointment. "This is your repair bay?" the kid asked, the universal translator flattening his voice into something almost emotionless. "It's screwed." Michael took a slow, deliberate sip of coffee from the metal thermos in his hand. "Yeah. Well, you came here, Kaidox Vane, because apparently this kid had a full name, one that carried some weight in whatever distant empire he came from." Glanced around the cluttered station hangar. Sparks rained down from an overhead rig where another mechanic was welding a hull plate back into place. A dozen ships of different makes lined the docks, all in varying states of disrepair. Grease and steel filled the air, the scent of honest work. Primitive, maybe, but it functioned. "My ship's self-repair system failed," Kaidox admitted, clearly hating every word. "I require assistance." Michael crouched beside the small ship, tapping a knuckle against the hull. He could tell just from sound, too hollow, too light, that the material was something humanity hadn't quite figured out yet. Still, the problems were obvious. The diagnostics panel flickered erratically. The heat sinks were improperly calibrated. The whole system was on the verge of a full shutdown, and any certified Xenotech specialist would likely declare the craft inoperable. Lucky for Kaidox, Michael wasn't certified. "Yeah, I can fix it," he said, rolling up his sleeves. Kaidox straightened. "I will require." Michael held up a hand. "I don't need the parts manifest, kid. I need a minute." The kid watched as Michael pried open an access panel with nothing but a flathead screwdriver and a flick of his wrist. Inside, the wiring was a nightmare, thin, pulsing strands of biotech interwoven with actual conduits, all tangled like a bird's nest. Over-engineered nonsense. The kind of thing built by people who trusted automation more than they trusted physics. Michael reached into his toolbox, grabbed a roll of duct tape, and tore off a strip with his teeth. Kaidox's silver eyes widened in horror. You are not serious." Michael ignored him, wrapping the tape around a particularly volatile-looking conduit. The system flickered, stuttered, then stabilized. The heat sink powered down. The coolant line unclogged. The ship hummed, as if taking a relieved breath. Kaidox looked between the ship and the tape, appalled. How did? Sometimes, the simplest solution is the right one. Michael dusted off his hands. "You're good to go, kid." Kaidox studied him carefully. There was something in that alien gaze, something measuring. Then, with a reluctant nod, he stepped toward the cockpit. "I will remember this, Michael James." Michael snorted. "Sure you will." He turned away, already thinking about his next job, already moving on, until the shouting started. 3 station managers stormed into the hangar, their pristine uniforms standing in stark contrast to the grease-streaked jumpsuits of the mechanics. The lead one, some corporate lackey Michael barely recognized, jabbed a finger toward him. "James." Michael sighed, turning back. "What?" The manager's face was red with anger. "Did you perform an unsanctioned repair on an alien vessel?" Michael took another sip of coffee. The man sputtered. "You violated half a dozen interspecies maintenance protocols. Do you even understand the diplomatic disaster you could have caused?" Michael looked at Kaidox, who was now standing beside his perfectly functional ship, watching the scene unfold with the detached curiosity of someone who had never been told no in his life. "Yeah, real disaster," Michael muttered. "Enough." The manager yanked a datapad from his belt and shoved it toward Michael. "You're fired. Effective immediately." Silence settled over the hangar. Every mechanic in the bay had stopped what they were doing, some looking between Michael and the manager like they just witnessed a man try to punch a bear. Michael set down his coffee. "I fixed the ship," he said evenly. "You violated procedure," the manager shot back. "This station does not employ reckless idiots." Michael felt his jaw tighten, the heat of frustration building in his chest, but he knew better than to argue. Corporate types never listened. They didn't care about results. Just policies. Just rules. So he unzipped his jumpsuit, stripped it off, and tossed it onto the floor. Beneath it, he wore an old NASA t-shirt, stained with oil and time. He grabbed his toolbox, his thermos, and walked past the manager without another word. As he stepped into the docking corridor, he heard the unmistakable whoosh of Kaidox's ship taking off. A small, advanced craft, now running perfectly, vanishing into the void. "Good luck, kid," he thought. Michael didn't look back. He had no job, no plans, and no patience for bureaucracy. But something told him he hadn't heard the last of that alien kid. Michael James had been fired before, but never like this. Corporate bureaucrats had a habit of throwing good men aside in favor of protocol, but this time, the sheer stupidity of it all burned. He fixed the ship. It worked. And for that, he was tossed out like yesterday's trash. Fine. He'd take his toolbox, his thermos, and his dignity, and he'd find another job. It wasn't the first time he'd walked away from a bad gig, and it wouldn't be the last. He knew plenty of stations that value mechanics who could actually fix things instead of just filing reports. That was the plan, right up until the fleet arrived. It started with a whisper, a murmur in the station's bars, passing between pilots and dockhands like a growing storm. Then the alarms blared. Security officers scrambled to their posts. Ships were locked down, comms channels flooded with frantic messages. Michael stood outside a seedy little bar on the lower decks, watching as dozens of sleek, silver ships materialized from FTL, each one moving with eerie precision. They settled in the void like a formation of hunting blades, their insignias unfamiliar to most, except to the station's top brass, who were suddenly looking very, very pale. Then came the transmission. A deep, resonant voice cut through every speaker, every display, every device on the station. It wasn't a request. It was a demand. "Bring me the human mechanic." Michael blinked. He took another sip of coffee. He didn't resist when security came for him. Where would he go? The station was in full lockdown, and he was too damn curious to say no. So he let them march him through the halls, past frantic engineers and panicked officers, all whispering his name like he was some kind of doomsday trigger. At the top of the command deck, he found himself standing in front of a massive hollow display, where the face of the man making the demand stared back at him. Not a man, a warrior, broad-shouldered, clad in ceremonial armor etched with symbols that pulsed faintly with some unknown energy. The alien's face was sharp and severe. The same silver eyes as the kid, but colder, older, more dangerous. Michael thought, so that's Daddy. "I am High Admiral Vane of the Ascendancy," the alien declared. "And you are the human who repaired my son's ship." Michael scratched the back of his neck. "Yeah, that was me. Something wrong with the fix." Silence. Then, a slow, measured response. "No, the repair was sufficient." Michael smirked. "Damn right, it was." The station's administrator stepped forward, hands clasped, his voice oily with forced diplomacy. "Admiral Vane, I assure you, this station." The alien cut him off with a single look. "I did not address you." The administrator swallowed, retreating a step. Michael exhaled slowly. "All right. So the guy meant business." The admiral focused on him again. "My son entrusted you with his vessel. That is not a small thing. Your kind are unproven." Michael arched a brow. "And yet, here I am." A flicker of amusement, or something close to it, passed through those silver eyes. "Indeed." The admiral leaned forward. "Which is why I now present you with a choice, human mechanic." A hush fell over the room. Every officer, every executive, Every soldier on the station seemed to hold their breath. The Admiral's next words were slow, deliberate. "You will come with me. You will serve as chief engineer for my fleet. You will be granted privileges no human has ever received." A pause. Then the hammer fell. "Or I will ensure that no human station ever works with the Ascendancy again." Michael's grip on his thermos tightened. He had dealt with ultimatums before, but nothing like this. This wasn't a threat against just him. It was leverage against every mechanic, every worker, every spacer trying to make a living in human-controlled sectors. The Ascendancy wasn't just some backwater power. If they blacklisted humanity from their contracts, entire industries would collapse. He could feel the weight of the station's command crew staring at him, their fear tangible. He wasn't just some grease monkey anymore. He was a bargaining chip in a game he hadn't even known was being played. Michael sighed, glancing at the administrator, whose forced smile barely masked his desperation. Then, back at the Admiral, who simply waited, unblinking. Finally, Michael shrugged. "Yeah, all right." The station's officers practically collapsed with relief. The Admiral gave a single nod, as if the decision had been inevitable. Michael drained the last of his coffee. "Just one thing." The Admiral raised a brow. Michael held up his thermos. "You got real coffee on those ships." A pause. Then, for the first time, High Admiral Vane smiled. Michael had the distinct feeling he had just signed up for something far bigger than a simple engineering job. And yet, for the first time in a long time, he was actually excited to find out what happened next. Michael James had never been on an alien warship before, but he was starting to suspect that the Ascendancy had a different definition of warship than humans did. The interior of the flagship was too damn clean. Not the sterile, corporate kind of clean that made his skin crawl, but something deliberate, every panel seamless, every surface humming with quiet energy. The walls pulsed faintly with circuits he couldn't begin to understand, though he got the distinct impression the ship could understand him. It wasn't just advanced. It was alive. He tightened his grip on his toolbox as he followed High Admiral Vane through a corridor lined with armored warriors. They stood at attention, but their silver eyes tracked him as he passed. No one spoke. No one had to. The Admiral walked ahead, every step precise, controlled. "You are remarkably calm for someone who was just abducted." Michael snorted. "Didn't feel like an abduction." Vane tilted his head slightly. Michael shrugged. "You gave me a choice. Didn't threaten to kill me if I said no. Can't say the same for a couple jobs I've had." A short, sharp chuckle. It was the closest thing to approval Michael had heard from the man yet. They reached a set of towering doors, etched with patterns that pulsed in slow, deliberate waves. The doors parted soundlessly, revealing a chamber that made Michael stop short. The council was waiting. A long, curved table stretched before him, occupied by figures draped in dark, flowing garments. Their faces were obscured by ornate masks, each one unique. Some smooth and featureless, others carved into sharp, predatory angles. A single silver eye blinked from the center of each mask, tracking his every move. Michael exhaled through his nose. He'd seen a lot of intimidating things in his life. Burned-out reactor cores, malfunctioning airlocks, a very angry bartender once. But this was something else. The Admiral took his place at the center of the room, standing tall as he addressed the masked figures. "The human mechanic is here." One of the counselors leaned forward. "We are aware." The voice was distorted, layered, as if multiple tones overlapped. It wasn't natural. Michael frowned. "You know, if you wanted to talk to me, you could have just sent a message." The air shifted. The weight of a dozen unseen calculations pressed against him, like he was being measured, dissected, classified. "The child," another counselor spoke, "entrusted you with his life." Michael rolled his shoulders. "I fixed his ship. Didn't realize that counted as a life debt." The heir's vessel was compromised, the first voice said. His safety was compromised. And yet, it was not his guards, nor his advisors, nor his own systems that ensured his survival. A pause. "It was you." Michael's eyes flicked toward the Admiral, who remained still, unreadable. "All right," Michael said slowly. I'm guessing this is the part where you tell me what that actually means. A third counselor spoke, voice deeper, heavier. It means you have changed the course of diplomacy between our people. Michael pinched the bridge of his nose. All I did was use some duct tape. A ripple of movement passed through the council, a reaction too controlled to be laughter, but carrying the same undertone. You misunderstand, the first voice returned. You saw the failure that our systems did not predict. Your tools are crude. Your knowledge is incomplete. But you succeeded where perfection failed. That is concerning. Michael raised a brow. Concerning. The ascendancy does not tolerate unpredictability. The weight of the words settled over him. That was the real problem, wasn't it? They weren't impressed. They were worried. He had done something their technology hadn't anticipated, something their perfect systems hadn't accounted for. And to them, that was a threat. The Admiral spoke at last, his voice quieter than before, which is why they require proof. Michael folded his arms. Proof of what? That you are an anomaly. The Admiral turned to him fully. Or a pattern. Silence stretched between them. Michael exhaled. He had spent his life fixing problems, patching up messes that no one else wanted to deal with. But this wasn't about repairs. This was a test. And if he failed, humanity might not get another chance. He cracked his neck, rolling out the tension. All right, what's the job? A final pause. Then, the counselor closest to him spoke, their voice colder than before. There is a ship, they said. A vessel deemed lost to the void. A failure of technology. You will retrieve it. Michael frowned. And if I say no? The counselor tilted their head. Then we will conclude that your success was mere coincidence. And we will adjust our policies toward your species accordingly. Another unspoken threat. Michael sighed, shaking his head. You guys really need to work on your hiring pitches. He glanced at the Admiral, who met his gaze evenly. There was something in those silver eyes, something almost like curiosity, maybe even the smallest trace of hope. Michael huffed, shifting his grip on his toolbox. Fine. Show me the damn ship. The council's masks gleamed under the cold light. The test had begun. Michael stood in the shuttle bay, arms crossed, staring at the derelict ship floating in the abyss beyond the viewport. It was massive, easily the size of a battleship, but its sleek, ascendancy design was marred by jagged tears along its hull. It drifted in silence, unpowered, its surface blackened by whatever catastrophe had sealed its fate. He exhaled through his nose. So, let me get this straight. Beside him, High Admiral Vane remained still, watching the wreck with unreadable eyes. Speak. Michael gestured toward the ship. You want me to go aboard that death trap, figure out why your fancy tech couldn't save it, and, what? Patch it up with some duct tape. The Admiral's lips twitched. If necessary. Michael huffed, shaking his head. You guys sure know how to roll out the red carpet. The Admiral turned toward him fully. Do you understand the importance of this task? Michael scratched his chin. Let me guess. If I fix the ship, I prove humanity isn't just some backwater species fumbling with wrenches. If I fail, the Council will determine that your species' ingenuity is a fluke. The Admiral's voice was quiet, and they will adjust their policies accordingly. Michael exhaled. No pressure, then. He grabbed his toolbox, adjusting the strap over his shoulder. All right, let's get this over with. A short while later, he was suited up, stepping into the cold silence of the derelict. The docking airlock had barely sealed behind him before he knew something was wrong. The air was still, but not dead. The faint hum of inactive systems pressed against his ears, like a beast in hibernation. Lights flickered in sluggish patterns, casting long, uneasy shadows. The ship was asleep. Michael tapped his helmet's comms. All right, I'm in. First impressions? Creepy as hell. Vane's voice crackled through. Proceed. Michael sighed and moved deeper inside. The corridors were pristine, save for the occasional scorch mark. No bodies, no signs of a struggle. Just an empty, abandoned ghost of a ship. He reached the main control terminal and set his toolbox down, cracking his knuckles. All right, let's see what's got you so spooked. As soon as he touched the console, the ship woke up. Panels flared to life, cascading in alien symbols too fast for his helmet's translator to process. A low vibration rumbled beneath his boots, and for a split second, Michael swore he could feel something watching him. Then, the screen stabilized. A single warning flashed in a language he didn't need to translate. Incompatible parameters. System locked, ***. Michael frowned. Huh? He reached into his toolbox, grabbed a multi-tool, and popped open a side panel. The circuits inside pulsed in slow, uneven rhythms, like a heart struggling to beat. He followed the wiring, fingers brushing against the connections, until he found the problem. There. A feedback loop, locked in place by the ship's own security protocols. It wasn't a hardware failure. The ship had shut itself down on purpose. Michael whistled. Now, why would you do that? No answer, of course. Just the hum of dormant power, waiting. He tapped his comms. Got good news. And bad news. Good news. The ship isn't actually broken. A pause. Then, Vane's voice. And the bad news. Michael exhaled. It doesn't want to turn back on. Silence. Then, the Admiral spoke. Slower this time. Explain. Michael ran a hand through his helmet. Near as I can tell, this thing hit something it couldn't explain. Instead of risking a catastrophic failure, it shut itself down, locked the system, wiped critical processes, everything. He glanced around the flickering room. Problem is, it locked itself too well. No way to reboot from inside. Another pause. Then, is there solutions? Michael smirked, reaching into his pack. Lucky for you, I brought a crowbar. He pulled out a set of hardwired diagnostic tools, human ones. No fancy neural links, no quantum processors. Just good, old-fashioned manual override. Carefully, he spliced into the ship's mainframe, bypassing the security failsafes with an approach so primitive the system didn't recognize it as a threat. The moment the final connection clicked into place, the ship shuddered. Lights flared. Consoles screamed warnings. The floor beneath him vibrated as power surged through the vessel. Michael grinned. And that, gentlemen, is why you always carry a backup plan. The ship groaned, then steadied. Systems rebooted in waves, stabilizing one after the other. For the first time, the displays translated into something readable. Michael's grin faded. Foreign entity detected. Access granted. Welcome, human ***. Michael's breath hitched. He tapped his comms. Admiral. Report. Michael swallowed. I don't think this was a standard ship failure. Vane's voice sharpened. Explain. Michael stared at the screen. This thing knew a human was going to be here. Silence stretched on the line. Then, the Admiral's voice was low, controlled. Return to the shuttle. Now. Michael didn't argue. He grabbed his tools and moved fast. As he retraced his steps, the ship shifted around him, lights pulsing brighter, doors sliding open just before he reached them. It was guiding him out. By the time he reached the airlock, his heart was hammering. He stepped through, sealed the connection, and slumped against a wall of the shuttle, breathing hard. The comms flared. We are departing. The shuttle detached. Through the viewport, Michael watched as the derelict ship slowly righted itself, its engines flickering to life. Then, without warning, it jumped. A shockwave rippled outward, rattling the shuttle as the massive vessel vanished into the void. Michael exhaled. That was weird. The Admiral's face appeared on the shuttle's hollow display, his silver eyes unreadable. We will discuss this upon your return. Michael let his head thump back against the seat. Yeah, he had a feeling that discussion was going to be very interesting.